So, good evening, everyone. I'm Graham Jobling from the College of Law in Adelaide, and this is one of the webinars from the Careers Academy, Career in Defence Law. And we'll be speaking with, we were to speak with Kane Kemp. He had to pull out at the very last minute, and kindly Sean Richter has stepped into his place. And Kerry-Anne Palzewski will be with us as well. I'm going to introduce Sean first, and then Kerry-Anne a little bit later on, and then we'll take it from there. And we're going to be exploring what a career in defence law involves. We'll look at these roles available, the must-have skills, and how to break into the field. But just before we do, I'd just like to acknowledge that as we gather for this webinar, we recognise that many of us are on different lands of different traditional custodians. We're on the Kaurna land here in Adelaide, but you're all over the place. And I'd like to acknowledge all of the traditional custodians of the lands we're all present on, and any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are participating in this event. I'd like to pay my respects to each of the elders past, present, and emerging. Okay, so I'm going to go to Sean Richter. Sean's stepped in at the very last minute to assist with this, and he has another commitment to go on to. So we're going to split the event into two sessions. Sean will be with us for 10 minutes or so. So Sean's a barrister at 3 Shell Chambers here in Adelaide, and he's, well, this time round, he's been a barrister for something like 7 years, sorry, yeah, 6.5 years. But prior to that, some years ago, was a barrister for 13 years. Has been a legal officer with the Australian Defence Force for 42 years, he tells me. He tells me it's time to retire. But also director of MBASA Legal, building construction firm, commercial law, and a little bit of an interesting background there. And in fact, I'm going to throw it open to Sean. Just to open, Sean is going to address the ADF side of things. What's your role with the ADF, Sean?
So, Graham, my role at the moment is I'm a Lieutenant Colonel in the Australian Army Legal Corps, which means I look after legal officers in South Australia, West Australia, Northern Territory who are reservists and who work in our what we call the brigades, which are our major combat units in each of those states.
Fantastic. And what are the broad roles for legal officers within the Defence Force?
Well, let me break it down into a couple of parts. When we talk about the Defence Force as such, rather than the Department of Defence, the Defence Force consists of the Army, the Navy, the Air Force. Now, our three roles are very different. My mates that are Navy legal officers, they often get on ships and they'll deploy. They'll go away for 6 or 9 months on a ship. Don't pick that one if you get seasick. If you're in the Air Force, no, you don't get to fly a jet and be JAG, but you do get to go and work at air bases and deploy overseas. The Army works embedded into Army units at a fairly senior level of the Army units. So there's the difference between the three forces. But as well as that, there are really 3 priority types of law we do in defence, in the defence space, and that is administrative law, operations law, and we do discipline law as well. So they are the 3 principal areas of law that we do. The Air Force is now leaning more into the space law arena, although I keep saying I think they just make it up as they go along. But the primary ones that if you join defence as a lawyer, you're going to find yourself advising on discipline, operations law, or administrative law.
Okay. And what are the roles more broadly, if that's your role as a reservist, or that's your role because you're not currently engaged as in the Army as a full-time officer? So they're the roles available as a part-time officer or part-time member of the Defence Force, and they're the broad roles available right across defence. Yeah.
Yep. Whether you're full-time or part-time, a reservist or permanent member of the Defence Force. The roles are pretty much interchangeable now. For example, in 2019, but for COVID happening, I was supposed to be deploying to Kabul to go and work with the NATO commander there. Now, I've only ever been a reservist. I've never been a full-timer, but I was one of the people that was in line for that role, simply because we as reserve lawyers bring a bunch of legal skills with us that Defence finds handy. So whether you're full-time or part-time, they are the types of roles you'll be doing. So when we talk about operations law, it's things like international law. What can you target? What can't you target? How do you have to treat prisoners? And if you look at the war going on in Ukraine at the moment, that brings a lot of interesting legal issues with it. And that's the sort of thing we do in the space we call operations law. In the administrative law space, it's how do we deal with people's issues of retention of service effectively. If we have somebody that we need to deal with to get them out of the service, they haven't behaved appropriately, they may have a medical issue, they may have a pay issue, all of those things. And the third one, of course, the discipline is when they play up.
Okay, and tell me, obviously, if you're a full-time member of the Defence Force, that's a paid role. A reservist paid?
Yes, reservists are paid.
Okay.
Compared to what lawyers make on the outside, the reserve training day pay isn't that particularly attractive.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Fair enough too.
We do it more for the sense of duty than you wouldn't do it for the money.
Okay. So if
it is tax free,
but it's tax free. Yeah. Okay. So if a graduate were interested in becoming a legal officer in the full or part-time ADF, where would they start?
First start point. Seek out a legal officer you know and sit down and chat with them and see if the lifestyle would suit you. Don't go off thinking you're going to join the military and it looks like something on telly. Find out what it's really like. There are great expos like the Defence Careers Day. My daughter did it up in Inogra in Queensland a couple of years ago. Go and meet people on a defence base, see if there's a type of lifestyle that would attract you. And then your next port of call is the Defence Force recruitment. So DFR, Defence Force Recruiting, and they recruit for both full-time and part-time roles. As part of that process, all legal officers come in as, lawyers come in as officers. So you're not going to go and do the 6 weeks at Kapooka and dig lots of holes and be a digger and do lots of force marches. It's a very different concept to that.
So you need your qualifications before you join.
Yeah, we don't currently. We did for a while. I don't think we've currently got an undergraduate program for lawyers. We used to have one. The Navy's done it from time to time, but generally we found that we can pick the low-hanging fruit. There's kids coming out of university with degrees. We don't need to pay for people to train to get their law degree. There's plenty of them out there.
Sure. And do they need to be admitted?
Yes, they do. Need to be admitted and have a practicing certificate these days.
Right.
That's as a result of some things that were discussed in the federal court some years ago about the privilege between the lawyers and the commanders when they were giving advice.
Right. Okay. And I might just at this point, because Sean's only with us for a few more minutes, invite anyone to put any questions up for Sean via the chat function, and we'll put those to Sean. So, what are the skills that you need? I mean, if I were heading in this direction, what would I do? Would I ensure that I cover off things like admin law as electives in both the undergrad and the PLT, or does that not really matter? Is it not something that we're too concerned about?
Not too concerned about. One of the primary hurdles I find junior lawyers hit when they join the Defence Force rather than the Department of Defence is that you've got to get through the physical standards. So my physical standard has to be the same as an old bloke who can carry a rifle. So if I'm for example, I've got a young captain working for me, he has to do the same fitness test that my infantry officers do, and it's pretty tough. He struggles with it. When I was his age, I struggled with it too. So he's got the 2.5K run, and I think he gets about 12 and a half minutes to do that. So you need to be physically capable of doing the role. I have people apply that will find that they can't pass the physical test. There is physical barrier testing before you start. So make sure that you fit that mold as well.
Great. And would you have any tips or traps for youngsters looking to join?
Tips for wanting to join, have a look at it, come try. I often say, go and join the Army Reserve as a private soldier and do 12 months, see if you don't mind the lifestyle. I did a number of years as a private soldier before I did this, and I enjoyed it, so I stayed. But if it's something you're not going to enjoy, find that out on the cheap, find that out the easy way, and dip your toe in the water. That's the first thing. The other tip is, if you get in, it's a great lifestyle. It's a great work environment, particularly the full-timers. Reserve, it's a bit different because we're busy in our civilian practices. But in the permanent force, there are lots of opportunities for travel, deployment, going up, and particularly the last 20 years, we've had a lot of people going overseas.
Okay. I've already invited, and there's no questions come up yet. Something I was going to say, though, is you mentioned reach out to someone who is involved as a reservist or full-time. And I've got to say that when Kane pulled out due to circumstances beyond his control, and we did a call out here in Adelaide amongst the legal profession, everyone jumped forward, people very collegiate, very supportive, and I would truly recommend anyone who has an interest to go and sit down with someone. And as Sean mentioned, it's not a widely known fact. I think that you can actually join on what they call a gap year in the Army, Navy, and Air Force these days. And Sean, would you be studying at the same time? So in other words, if I've gone, I'm studying, can I go in on a gap year and continue to study, or do I need to be qualified before I go in?
I reckon if you win on a gap year, it's pretty tough to keep studying. Gap years, generally, we take people in as private soldiers, as young airmen and women, and as sailors. I think studying would be a bit of a tough ask. When you're out in the middle of the high range training area in the back end of Queensland, digging your gun pit at 3 o'clock in the morning, you ain't going to be thinking about studying.
And you might not have internet coverage either.
It might not.
Yeah, fair enough. Okay, well, look, thank you very much, Sean. And I haven't got any questions come up, but if anyone does have a question they wanted to pop up and that comes to them later on in the webinar, I'll take a note of that. And well, I'll give you an email address that you can send it to, actually. So that might be the way to go. And again, thank you so much for stepping in at very, very short notice and assisting us with that.
All right. Thanks, Graham.
Thanks, Sean.
Good luck. Cheers.
Thank you. I now have great pleasure in introducing Kerry-Anne. Kerry-Anne is a commercial and subcontract manager at Babcock, Australia. Babcock is part of the international group, the Defence and Aerospace Company, headquartered in the UK. She provides commercial and legal advisory support on bids, tenders, contracts, contract negotiation, and management across Babcock's defence programs. Focusing primarily on marine programs. Kerry-Anne also provides internal advice on corporate governance. Kerry-Anne's background is she was private legal practice and commercial and corporate law for some time. Also a legal consultant in the automotive industry in Germany and the UK, and a legal advisor in naval shipbuilding for a German shipbuilding company. Kerry-Anne studied law at the University of Adelaide here in Adelaide, I should say, and also has an MBA from the Munich Business School, and the topic was a master's thesis, innovation in legal services. So welcome and thank you, Kerry-Anne. Can you tell us a little bit about your role at Babcock?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Graham. So as you mentioned, my current role is commercial and subcontract manager at Babcock. My primary role is to provide commercial advisory support, mainly in contract law. So drafting, amending, advising on contracts for our key programs, and just general commercial business and legal advice, as well as that corporate governance advice as well. So Babcock itself doesn't have an internal legal team. Our commercial team is made up primarily of lawyers. So we are the go-to within the organisation.
Brilliant. And you're located here in Adelaide.
Yep. Yep.
Where else is Babcock in Australia?
We're all over. So our sort of head office in the region is here in Adelaide CBD. We operate out of Osborne at the Naval Shipyard, also out of Henderson, the Naval Shipbuilding Yard in WA, as well as Sydney, Garden Island, and I think that's the main locations, but we operate pretty much wherever our customers need us. And we support an agile working environment. So we basically can work from wherever. There's no sort of fixed place that anyone needs to work from. We're all very mobile.
Very mobile. Good, good. So tell me a little bit about the aviation and services and the critical service in aviation.
Yeah, so that's one arm of what Babcock do. So I might just give you a summary because we do so much that sometimes it's difficult for me to get my head around it. So whereas Sean was just speaking about involvement in the ADF, the Australian Defence Force, we're what you call defence industry. So we supply and maintain equipment that is used by the Australian Defence Force. So we make sure that the ships and the submarines and the land vehicles and airplanes all function correctly and are not, going to let our troops down, which is a very important role, as you can imagine. So Babcock itself is involved in marine, aviation, land, and nuclear mainly in our UK organisation, but we're working to bring that capability to Australia given the recent announcement of the nuclear submarines. In our marine business, which is where I predominantly work, we repair, sustain, design, and support a wide range of vessels for the Australian and New Zealand navies. I probably forgot to mention that we operate in New Zealand as well. And we're partnered with the Royal New Zealand Navy to provide sustainment, which is like maintenance of the entire New Zealand Navy fleet. In Australia, we sustain the Royal Australian Navy's Anzac class frigates, the landing helicopter docks, and the landing craft. So the big warships. Here locally and in Henderson, we support the critical systems of the Collins class submarines. So the weapons launch system, weapons handling system, submerged signal ejectors, and the air purification units. So we work with ASC on that program. And then we also operate in sort of land and other types of programs in high frequency communications, ground support equipment for the ADF, and also in aviation, which is sort of a little bit outside of defence, but the critical services part is border protection, search and rescue, Ambulance Victoria, Qantas, and Air New Zealand. So our knowledge and our depth of engineering capability is quite broad, but really, really exciting as well to be working on those kinds of programs.
Absolutely. Now, clearly, there's a lot of critical stuff there that you're looking after. Obviously, defence are not just going to let anyone work on their systems, etc. What's the background there? What are the requirements, both of the firm that you're working for, but of the individuals?
So yeah, I mean, obviously, depending for the purposes of this webinar, with commercial and legal type work, obviously, you know, your law degree is very handy. It's not a prerequisite, but it certainly is looked upon very favourably. we all maintain practicing certificates and, you know, maintain our CPD points, and all of that is required for our practicing certificates. But aside to that, working in defence industry does have extra sort of requirements, and it's worth doing some research on what that might be. So just an example, we deal with, it's called like export controlled equipment. So there's certain regulations and licenses around who can handle and view and work with particular equipment, which is regulated by Australian export controls, but also in the US. So we need to follow those protocols and those procedures. We also have sort of some requirements around having a defence security clearance. So that's a couple of things that are sort of prerequisites to working in the industry. And in some cases, nationality is a factor that's taken into account when applying for these roles.
It sounds to me that like a little bit of international law comes into it then.
Yeah, so absolutely international law, but I think predominantly in what I do particularly, it's there's a lot around contracts, but intellectual property, so IP law. If you think about it, we are creating new systems, new products, all the latest innovation. We've got some very, very smart engineers and programmers and IT people producing this stuff, which is going to enhance and equip our defence force with the best of the best systems. So we need to protect that IP. So if anyone's got an interest in IP law, this is definitely the industry to get into, because that's a daily thing that we need to be across.
One of the questions I asked Kane in preparation for this event was the size of the industry, and Kane said it's easily in the billions each year across government and industry. Forward estimates has defence spending 270 billion in 10 years, in the next 10 years, and we know that that will be underestimated as well. And in terms of lawyers, it's difficult to estimate how many there are. Approximately 3,000 lawyers working in the ADF at the moment, and that's a combination of full-time uniform military lawyers and reservists. And that doesn't include private practice lawyers who have defence and companies with industries as clients, or in-house lawyers, etc. So that's the other side to what you're doing, is working with the Defence Department, isn't it? Mm-hmm. So really, is the Defence Department your main client, or is it the people who build the Collins class submarines? Do you actually build them, or are you just maintaining them, and so on?
Yeah, so I guess for those looking for a career in defence, I mean, it's huge. We've just heard from Sean about working as a legal officer in the Australian Defence Force. But then there's two other arms that I probably think are relevant to keep in mind as well. So there's the Department of Defence, which is the department which is in charge of acquisition and the programs to equip our Defence Force with the equipment that they require. And I think within the Department of Defence, there's a multitude of roles in contracting, legal, procurement, work health and safety, international agreements, space law, as Sean touched on before as well. So that's a government role, and that's program management. So those are the programs that Defence work with, the relevant ADF branch. So for example, Navy, in working out what they need, what capability they need. So for example, the future submarines, they've decided they need to have new submarines because the current Collins class are aging. And so the Department of Defence works with the Navy to bring that program to life, basically. Then you've got defence industry, which is where the industry that I work in. And within that industry, you've got private companies, which are classified in terms of, like prime companies or prime contractors. So they're your bigger companies like Babcock, BAE Systems, Boeing, those kinds of companies, which are OEMs for a lot of the systems. They build the ships. They have that capability, but then under that you've got a huge supply chain, and these are the Australian companies that basically the primes rely on to get the programs underway and to deliver to the customer, the end customer being the Department of Defence and then the relevant branch of the Defence Force. So within that defence industry, you've just got so many players, and lawyers are always required, because when you've got suppliers and subcontractors, you need contracts. And if you've got an interest in contract law, that's definitely an area to have a look into a bit more, because there's just so much opportunity. And like you said, with defence spending $270 billion in the next 10 years on defence programs, it's really a growing, and there's a lot of jobs out there, and it's really growing industry.
And speaking of jobs, tips and traps for preparing yourself for jobs and opportunities perhaps at companies like Babcock.
Yeah, look, so I think obviously attending sessions like this to sort of expand your knowledge on the potential careers that are out there. Look, to be honest, I, as a graduate lawyer, thought that the only career path for me was to go and work in a law firm. But I did that for a while, and I realised that it wasn't for me, and I wanted to sort of get out there and work on something that was tangible, to be able to go out. I worked at a shipbuilding company before working at Babcock. To be able to go out into the shipyard and see the ship was just so rewarding. So yeah, definitely do some research at the opportunities that are out there. You don't have to look at the traditional roles. So it doesn't necessarily have to be like an in-house legal type role where your skills can be utilised and where they're really valued. There's a lot to be said about working in these commercial management roles, because we really are the conduit to sort of the other departments within the organisation. So I'm dealing with the finance teams, program management, engineering. I'm learning something new every day, speaking to those really intelligent people that operate in those departments. So I'll definitely say research, think outside the square a little bit, and work out what you want to really, like what skills you really want to hone into. So, as I said, contract law, IP, negotiation, it's really all there for you. Probably like build your network, and like we said with Sean previously, reach out to people who, LinkedIn's a great tool for that. Find mentors in the industry, reach out to College of Law, who have got, stacks of contacts that they can put you in touch with. There's a lot of events, obviously career events, but defence specific events that are held around Adelaide, but also interstate. But it's Adelaide, South Australia is the defence state, so we have a huge variety of different expos and events that go on. So get along to those. A lot of them are free. So yeah, and just go for it, I think.
You mentioned to me when we were discussing this particular event that often it's not clear from the title of the role that it's truly a legal officer's role. And So what do you need to do there? Go in deeper, look behind that, and look into the job description, and just determine how much law is involved?
Yeah, absolutely. So, for example, when Babcock advertise for commercial managers, we put that it's desirable for the person to have a legal degree. It's not a requirement, but we often find that those with legal degrees obviously can interpret, read, understand a contract than someone who might not be legally trained. But I definitely think, you know, you just need to do a bit of research on what you want to do. And, you know, there's all these different names, you know, there's contract managers, there's commercial managers, in-house legal, these different terms don't sort of, it's important to look past the title. You don't need to be called a lawyer to work in a role that is, you know, predominantly providing legal advice anyway.
Absolutely. Yeah. And do you get to travel much?
I have a bit in this role. There was a huge expo at in Sydney on the marine industry. So it's called Indo-Pacific, where all the big companies in defence show off their, you know, off their skills and what they're building and what they're working on at the moment. So that was fantastic. But obviously, being part of a global company, I'm going to be heading over to Bristol, to our Babcock office in Bristol in October, to meet with our commercial team over there. We're working very closely together on a program here. And yeah, there's a lot of sort of particular issues in terms of intercompany trading and intercompany agreements that we're dealing with at the moment, and the transfer of IP. So it's really good to be able to have those opportunities to go over and meet with colleagues. And that's another good thing about working for a bigger company. You just get all kinds of different opportunities thrown at you. So yeah, a bit of travel. I probably will go over to Henderson. So that's the other site where we work on the Collins class submarines. And go over there and meet the team there. A lot of our meetings are done by WebEx or online, so it's good to do that now that we can travel, to do that face-to-face contacts. Yeah, there's a bit of travel.
Now, if people wanted to get in touch with Babcock, where would they start? Do you have a link there that you can share with us?
Yeah, so I will put a link to our careers page in the chat. So that's where we advertise all of our open positions, but we also have an early careers program, which you might like to have a look at as well. And that gives you a bit of an overview of the different types of areas of the business, because it really is just astounding at what Babcock do, and you sort of get the opportunity to work in different departments. But you know, ultimately, if you want to work in commercial, there's positions for you there. So yeah, it's I'll put hopefully one link's gone in there.
One link is already up. Yep.
Yep. I've just got to find the early careers one in a moment, but otherwise you can get in touch with us on LinkedIn. And our team travel around doing a whole number of careers expos, and there we go, to try and recruit, because we've just got so much going on that we've got a lot of openings, and we're always looking for talented graduates, particularly lawyers. So yeah.
Fantastic. Any other tips and traps before we wind things up for the evening?
I think the main one is just do some research. So it all sounds really like cool and exciting with, you know, ships and submarines. And it is, don't get me wrong, it absolutely is. But it's important to understand the industry and what type of programs are out there and what might interest you. So I've sort of found my place in marine, in ships and submarines, and that's mainly because I did research on where are the jobs in South Australia. So after having spent some time over in Europe and decided to move back here, I wanted to find an industry that was growing so I could have career security and the chance to grow in my career. So I did a bit of research and found that naval shipbuilding is big in South Australia. And there's a real kind of push for people to get into those roles. Defence SA, the local South Australian government department, also facilitate careers type of events. So I think it might be also worthwhile researching through Defence SA. If you want to stay in SA, that is, but there's certainly many opportunities all around Australia for people wanting to get into defence industry. So I think, research is probably the number one take home for me, as well as just building a network and asking questions. You know, you'll find that most people are more than happy to reach out and to provide that advice. And also maybe just think about what skills you might need to be successful in this type of role. So what we've found is that being in it, and it's quasi in-house, you need to be able to work collaboratively with your internal and external stakeholders. So you think about it, when you're working in-house, your clients are all around you in the organisation. So anyone can just pop over and ask a question at any time, and you're expected to sort of give that advice, which is fine. It's just really demanding.
Yes.
And then you've got to sort of understand what potentially are their, their objectives and what they need to know. Being a problem solver. So I think it's a little bit different to working in private practice. In private practice, you sort of give your advice and the client can decide whether to follow it or not. And you sort of give your advice in accordance with, legislation or case law. However, because you're embedded in the business here, we need to think what the greater outcome needs to be. And sometimes you need to sort of think, okay, what's the end goal? And really, just solve the problem and being a bit proactive in that respect. You definitely need good communication skills. You need to be able to communicate with different departments, so finance, engineering, IT, program management. So you need to convey your message or your advice in a manner that they can understand. And also sometimes I find that people don't know the question that they're asking you. So they know there's a problem, but they're not sure what the question, So it's sort of trying to understand and get to the bottom of what they're asking you. And then I just think think broadly, think about, business development, innovation, program management. So any of those additional skills that you might be able to pick up along the way through training or electives, just thinking outside of the sort of strict legal courses of the degree definitely help. I definitely found that my MBA studies helped, and I'm not saying you have to do an MBA, but just those kinds of topics really help to sort of just provide that holistic kind of view on a problem or on a situation, so you can really be a good value add to the organisation.
Fantastic. Well, I'm looking to see if there are any questions in the chat function. There aren't. So I'm going to wrap things up at this point, unless there's anything else you want to say.
No, all I can say is, reach out, find a mentor, do some research. It's a very exciting career to, industry to build your career in. Think outside the square. Yeah, just everything that I've already said. It's a massive industry and very exciting, and it's rewarding to think that we're, equipping our ADF with the best possible systems and equipment to defend. So
Yes,
yeah.
It just seems to be a field that is going to grow and grow and grow. The more unrest, unfortunately, the more unrest in the world, the more governments will be spending money in this field, the more it will grow. And our experience through COVID was we need to have more reliance on what we can do here in Australia. So I would have thought more and more will be brought into Australia rather than us relying on what's happening overseas. So yeah.
Yep.
So Kerry-Anne, thank you so much, and wish you all the very best, and invite people to reach out to you via LinkedIn if they want a bit more information. And apart from that,
keep an eye on Babcock Careers if you're interested.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you very much, Kerry-Anne, and thank you, everyone.
Graham. Thanks, everybody. Thanks. Bye.